Hello, and welcome to the Port of Los Angeles March Media Briefing. I'm Philip Sanfield, the Port's Communications Director. As always, I'm joined by Executive Director Gene Seroka. Greetings, Gene.
Hello, Philip, and welcome, everyone. We sincerely appreciate your interest and participation in today's event. In just a few moments, we'll be joined by this morning's guest, Leo Hoosman, the Regional Managing Director for the Americas at APM Terminals. Leo oversees 14 container terminals in 8 countries across both North and South America, including APM Terminals Pier 400 right here in Los Angeles. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We'll discuss global maritime disruptions, shipping alliances, and the strategies container terminals are now employing to be successful. And of course, we'll take your questions as well.
Thanks, Gene. Now let's start, as we always do, with an update on cargo volume and what factors are impacting the first quarter. How did we do after that exceptional January start?
Philip, February was another strong month at the Port of Los Angeles, with volume reaching 781,000 20-foot equivalent units. That's a huge 60% improvement over last year's very soft February, and it marks our 7th consecutive month of year-on-year growth. We saw a significant uptick over last year in all categories, with overall February volume exceeding our running 5-year average by 15%. Imports landed at 409,000 TEUs, a 64% jump over last year. Now, February 2023 was an unusually light month for us due to the early Lunar New Year slowdown and cargo shifting away during protracted labor negotiations. Still, compared to our 5-year February average, imports were up a strong 20%. On the export side, Los Angeles processed 133,000 TEUs, a 61% increase over last year. That marks our 9th straight month of year-on-year improvements and our best export month since back in 2020. While data on the content of those boxes lags by a few months, we're generally seeing improvements across our top export categories, including ag products, recycled goods, and plastics. Meanwhile, we handled 240,000 empty TEUs, an increase of 54% over 2023. That number bodes well for the future as shippers strategically position boxes for a return trip across the Pacific later this spring. So, 2 months into 2024, the Port of Los Angeles has already moved 1.6 million TEUs. That surpasses last year's sluggish start by 35% and puts us in line with our pre-pandemic volume from back in 2019. Looking ahead, March cargo volume should be in the 650,000 TEU range as cargo eases somewhat with a later Lunar New Year slowdown, but pickup started very quickly. That would bring our first quarter total to almost 2.3 million TEUs, or 25% better than last year. Overall, I like our position as we move into Q2 for several reasons. First, the market's confidence in our gateway is as strong as it's ever been. And thanks to the long-term labor deal now in place, we've got the world's best longshore workforce eager and ready to work. Second, our operational data shows that cargo is flowing efficiently, and we have additional capacity available to accommodate future demands. Lastly, the latest data continues to show that the U.S. economy is solid, which continues to bolster consumer confidence. A strong February jobs report with 275,000 new jobs added, along with an uptick in retail sales, makes it clear that Americans are keeping up with their spending habits. While questions remain about the direction of inflation and interest rates, our economy continues to get a boost from the job market and rising wages. The bottom line, Philip, the Port of LA is in a good spot as we move into the next quarter and the rest of 2024.
Thanks for that overview, Gene. Before we get to Leo, one question. Nearly 4,000 participants gathered in Long Beach earlier this month for the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference put on by S&P Global. What are your post-TPM thoughts?
Philip, this year's event was top-notch, the 24th annual TPM, an incredible opportunity to connect with customers, partners, and industry friends, all in person. From early mornings to late evenings, I met with a wide range of stakeholders. One highlight for me was the diversity of this year's attendees and panelists. There were more young people, more women, and individuals from many different backgrounds. It was so inspiring to see more inclusivity and representation. And I also want to acknowledge the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, who were out in force at TPM advocating for increased cargo in our gateway. Special thanks to ILW leaders Gary Herrera, Danny Miranda, Mike Trudeau, and Sal DiConstanzo, along with others, for their efforts in spreading the word about Southern California's capabilities. Their support is incredibly valuable and greatly appreciated. I've got 3 TPM takeaways. First, there's a lot of concern out there about geopolitical and other supply chain risks. There are no less than 4 conflicts taking place right now in the Middle East, some of which impact on the Suez Canal throughput. There's drought in the Panama Canal and ongoing ILW negotiations with specific deadlines, along with our general elections here in the U.S. coming up the first Tuesday in November. The question being, where does the logistician now allocate their cargo, to what gateway, and how do they plan for unforeseen events? Second, sustainability was top of mind. Whether it's right here in Long Beach or Los Angeles with the Twin Ports zero emissions initiatives, green shipping corridors, future regulation by the International Maritime Organization, and a host of other issues. Major discussion points around who will pay for all these programs and how do we accelerate the technology while finding the funding and investment streams to quickly follow. We'll all need to step forward, and that's why we continue to underscore the importance of public-private partnerships. And lastly, contract season, which unofficially kicks off at TPM, may look just a little bit different this year. We all thought there would be an overhang of capacity in the marketplace, especially here in the Trans-Pacific Theater, but some ships are being absorbed into east-west services traversing the Middle East. There's also the East and West Coast rate differential right now, with East Coast rates having a wider gap versus those here out west than in recent memory. A lot will be made of that as contracts are negotiated. In talking with some attendees, don't be surprised if we see peak season cargo coming here to the West Coast just a little bit earlier than usual, and again, trying to take a look at the landscape of these issues on a global basis. Here in LA, we're running at about 75 to 80% of peak capacity. We're ready to pivot and handle whatever comes our way.
Thanks, Gene. And now it's time to bring in our guest. Please go ahead and do the honors.
Oh, happy to, Philip. Leo Husman of APM Terminals, which is an independent division of AP Moller Maersk, is a highly experienced professional with over 3 decades of industry expertise. Throughout his career, Leo has worked around the world, including stops in Kenya, the United Kingdom, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Denmark. Currently based in Panama, Leo joins us today visiting the APM terminal in Guatemala. Leo, great to see you at TPM, and thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule here.
Thanks, Gene. It's great to be here.
Well, let's dive right in. Managing container terminals across the Western Hemisphere gives you a unique perspective on global disruptions. From where you sit, Leo, what kind of an impact can we have on trade this year?
Yeah, I think it's a crystal ball, but I think 2024 is off to a good start in the whole Western Hemisphere, and specifically in the United States, because, as you said, the terminals, the supply chain is fluid, it is efficient, so we are ready to handle more. What I do see is that the nearshoring in the Americas is continuing, and especially some spectacular growth on imports in Mexico. So that is very strong, and I think other countries in Latin America will also benefit from this. Of course, being based in Panama, I live the drought currently in the Panama Canal, and we have to face that climate warming is having an impact. The El Niños are getting tougher and tougher, and as such, the Panama Canal is a big bottleneck, less intake on vessels, and some reroutings, and it is increasing the cost. As you see, that's starting to filter through on the price differential between East Coast and the West Coast. And of course, earlier this year with the Red Sea attacks, that really has shifted the whole industry in a different gear, absorbing all the excess capacity and letting ships run faster now. But the shipping lines have done quite well in making sure capacity is able to meet the demand figures out there. But I'm positive that across the whole Western Hemisphere, we see in 24 more growth than what we have seen in 23.
That's our take as well. Leo, there are some changes also happening with respect to ocean services. Tell us a little bit about these shifting alliances and how some of these may affect terminals, including us right here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think the alliances with the Gemini berth is an important change because the vessel classes are getting larger, the networks are getting more complex, and the reliability of the liner services is not very good, as we can see in the statistics. The Gemini is basically re-engineering the whole network setup so that they get to the 90% reliability. And that would be great to also achieve in Los Angeles and Long Beach, that the vessels can arrive as per schedule. There is more reliability on the vessel side, there's more reliability in the supply chain. So I think in many ways, this is starting to pivot into liner networks going after more reliability, which both importers and exporters have been asking for a long time. This is some tangible change which will allow this. And the leaders, there will be many followers to look at how this can be achieved.
We seem to go in cycles on this issue, Leo. For some time, it seems like there is not a lot of emphasis on that secure on-time arrival departure, from the cutoff in Asia to the availability here at the destination in the United States. And then suddenly we pivot back again to something that clients have been asking for a long time. Again, it seems a little bit cyclical. Will it stick this time?
It is a difficult one because the ships are so much bigger and they are getting bigger and more advanced. So the cargo exchanges in the ports, they are massive in many figures. So reliability is difficult to achieve if you do not deploy a different network. And what Gemini is doing, for example, specifically on the East-West, is that there are a number of hubs which are being scaled up, and they're using different types of technology to be able to deliver that network reliability. These hubs run by APM Terminals, they're like the shock absorbers of a efficient network. And that's where a lot of investment with the local workforces, with the tools we use, is now work in progress, and very confident that the teams are ready to make Gemini a success.
On that note, Leo, what do we have to do as port authorities and global terminal operators to ensure success not only now, but into the future?
Well, I would like to stay specific to Los Angeles and Long Beach. I think you have a regulation out there, the Clean Air Action Plan, which is unique in the world. I think in 2030, you can be the complex which has the zero emission objective achieved. That is something remarkable. And we need to invest in the right cargo handling equipment so that we can make this transition from diesel to the more sustainable fuels in the world. Then the second challenge, I would say, is, and you are the master of that, you need to make sure that all the liners are deploying their newest vessels in the Los Angeles Long Beach corridor. because that is the biggest item we need to create the green corridors, that the ocean part of the transport chain, that all these vessels on the eco-friendly fuels, the methanol, green methanol, that they are welcome to come and they want to come to Los Angeles. And then a third item, I think, is that all this new technology, which we have to accelerate in Los Angeles, technology is coming to the workforce. So we have to upskill and retrain the workforce to be able to deal with this more advanced technology that creates high-skilled jobs. And in this respect, what we're doing with the training center, which should have its first courses by the end of April, hopefully, then we are starting to work on reskilling and working with our longshore partners that they are ready to handle this new technology.
Yeah, this piece is so important to all of us. We know that technology is moving faster than ever and the pace will continue to pick up. But here in Los Angeles, we've said many times, we cannot leave the workforce behind. In addition to the upskill and reskill facility that APM is working through with the Pacific Maritime Association and its member companies, the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles have now embarked on the country's first goods movement training campus. And with the ILWU as our anchor tenant of sorts, we want this to be a community-involved effort. From the youngster who sees the port every day going to school to the person of my vintage that really needs the new skills to be a viable employee and continue to pursue their work efforts for years to come. We've got to continue to hone in on this area, and couldn't agree with you more on the Clean Air Action Plan. This voluntary program combined between Long Beach and LA starting back in 2006 has reduced diesel particulate matter by 90% since its inception. Sulfur oxide is down 97% and nitrogen oxide down 64%. But to get after this last piece, making that huge leap to zero emission is our path to the future. And as you rightly say, we've got to accelerate that technology, have the funding streams, because this is a monumental investment in time, energy, finances, as well as bringing people together. And there's a lot of work to do in the 5 source categories, from the ocean-going ships and our response with the green shipping corridors, the 20,000 trucks that call the San Pedro Bay complex on a regular basis, the locomotives, of which we've received an EPA grant to start testing the first ever zero-emission locomotive that's hydrogen fuel cell electric powered and manufactured by the Wabtec company, to the watercraft, the harbor craft, as well as the cargo handling equipment. So we've got our eye on the prizes, 5 big ones for us to go after between the private and public sector interests that are working so hard together. Appreciate those insights, Leo. Thank you. Philip, back over to you for some questions from the media.
Thank you, Gene. We've received several questions in advance, but we'll try to squeeze a few in from the Q&A box below. So if you do have a question, please include your name and affiliation in that chat in the Q&A box below. The first question is from Lisa Bartline at Reuters. Gene, it's directed at you, though Leo may want to follow up and have a few thoughts as well on this. Gene, are you seeing signs of cargo shifting from the East Coast to the West Coast as a result of the Red Sea, Panama Canal, East Coast labor talks?
Hi, Lisa, and thanks for joining us again today. Yes, and my last trip overseas, I was in India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. I'll be going back to Singapore, Vietnam, and Hong Kong at the beginning of next month. And what importers and exporters are telling me, more so than ever, they don't want to be the last people to shift cargo to another gateway should market conditions change. So we're starting to see companies talk about shifting 2, 3, 5% of their business to different gateways to diversify a little bit, and we're seeing that. Now, as I've said before publicly, we're not trying to profit on anyone else's misfortune, but we do have capacity here in Los Angeles, and in our effort to support those importing and exporting companies and the American economy, we stand ready to assist. Thanks, Lisa.
Leo, any thoughts on that on this topic of cargo shifting?
Yeah, of course, cargo is shifting back because the ILW PMA contract is now established, and that complexity is out of the way. So naturally, some cargo is moving back. We have a complex negotiation at the end of the year, but right now the ports on the East Coast and the Gulf are same. They're fluid, they're efficient. The workforce is showing up and working as hard as they do every day. But again, the shippers and they have to make up their own mind, and some of them will diversify. And I agree with Gene. Some of them are putting some freight back to the West Coast Gateway. How fast that will go, it depends on how the negotiations are progressing, and they are progressing right now on plan. And we will know in earnest in June, July if the parties are able to come to an amicable agreement. And they are both then still committed that we want to keep trade flowing into the United States, and that the ILA has a great history of prioritizing that by all means.
Thank you, Leo. Next question is from Alejandra Salgado of Supply Chain Dive, and it's a topic that's been in the news a lot lately over the last several weeks. President Biden's recent executive order on port cybersecurity specifically mentions Chinese manufactured shipping cranes as security risks. Can you speak to the level of concern regarding this? Gene, maybe you'd like to start, and then we can get Leo's thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. And Alejandra, it's really a wake-up call for all of us in the maritime industry. The Port of Los Angeles opened the nation's first cybersecurity operations center in partnership with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security almost 10 years ago. Just last year in 2023, this CSOC, as we call it, stopped 750 million intrusion attempts completely, or about 63 million monthly. That's well more than double the number of attempts pre-COVID. With that, we co-created, along with IBM, and introduced one of the world's first cyber resilience centers. This was to bring the private sector interest into the port's cyber threatscape. And so far, with more than 24 partners, think of terminal operators, shipping lines, railroads, trucking firms, and as a founding member of the ILWU. Thus far, after 16 months of existence, this CRC has stopped 6 intrusion attempts to private sector interests of which they were unaware were coming. It's an early warning system, if you will. We start seeing these activities, synthesize the data with IBM, and then get it out to those 24 partners to make sure that they can fortify their cyber arenas. There's much more work to do in this area, but that's step one. The second piece of the EO is that we need to look at diversifying the manufacture of these cranes and other port equipment. We've talked for a long time about how containers, chassis, cargo handling equipment are manufactured in far-reaching locations, and when supply chain issues surface, these become highlighted. So the work to use manufacturing interests and investment here in the United States to be closer to this network of ports that employ more than 31 million of us around the country is very important. Leo?
Yeah, I think the Chinese cranes, we all have to understand that the steel is Chinese, the assembly is Chinese, but the control systems which communicate, they are non-PRC. They are from countries like Germany, Japan, and Malaysia. So we have to call a spade on this. Of course, cyber is a massively important subject, and the entire port ecosystem needs to step up in making sure cyber threats are managed, and that in the event there is a cyber penetration in a type of equipment or a system, that we have the systems in place that it can't spread. And as APM Terminals, together with our partners, we're investing a lot of time and attention to ensure that our systems are cyber secure.
Thank you both. This next question is from Stas Margaronis, American Journal of Transportation, and it's for you, Leo. Could the Chinese-owned shipping line Costco wind up dominating the South American Pacific coast trade routes once the Chinese-built port at Chancay, Peru, is open later this year?
Yes, the jury is out if that will be the case. Changsha, for those who don't know where it is, and I won't blame you, it is situated about 60 kilometers north of Callao, which is the main port complex in Peru, in Lima. So the Chinese Costco is building a super modern port with an automated yard, state-of-the-art equipment, and they're working in terms of redefining how shipping lines will service the west coast of South America. And I do believe that with its capabilities, its crane setup, and its water depth, that a lot of the smaller ports in Chile, Peru, and in Ecuador will be served in the future by a different concept. Not any more big ships going in directly, but they will be hubbing from that particular port. So yes, for Peru, it will generate hundreds of thousands of containers in transshipment and a different ship system, which I think in the end is to the benefit of importers and exporters. So it's going to be hopefully starting at the end of this year, next year, and it will be super interesting for everybody to follow how that is transforming how container shipping is done on the west coast of South America.
Thanks, Leo. Gene, Eric Watkins from Cargomatic, this question's for you. Recent reports suggest that China is using Mexico as a way of bypassing U.S. tariffs. Are the current imports through Mexico adversely affecting trade through the Port of L.A.?
Eric, appreciate you joining again today, and great question. As we've talked about for a number of years now, dating back to the first tariff implementation in March of 2018 by the previous administration in Washington, there's undoubtedly been impacts in global trade, especially as it relates to China-U.S. business on ocean transportation. What we've seen is that from the Port of Los Angeles perspective, closing out year 2022, 57% of our business was tied to China. Last year, it dropped down to 53%. And I've said in recent interviews that I see this over the next couple of years probably dropping down to about 45% of the port's business being directly in trade, import, export with China. What that means is that many logistician and supply chain experts are saying they're looking at a China +1 or +2 strategy. We've seen growth in Vietnam cargo, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, just to name a few. India continues to work its way on a global scale to talk more and more about infrastructure, supply chain, rare earths, battery capabilities. So there is a shift in global trade. And more recently, you've seen China's investment in Mexico across several of the industry verticals and imports rising there dramatically, as Leo said earlier in this broadcast. All of which says that the USMCA agreement, the Mexico-Canada-US agreement, sees more and more activities of parts going cross-border to the completed product and then distribution throughout the three-country pact. So this will be a continuing trend. And China won't just sit back and watch tariffs impact their overall work on imports and exports, where it impacts their GDP, which is now estimated after the Congress let out to show a 5% growth rate this year in China. So much more to come as this story continues to unfold. But granted that China will be investing in other countries, Mexico is a big one. We'll see trade routes shifting, and the Port of Los Angeles has to be in front of this to continue to earn that cargo coming through this gateway.
Thank you, Gene. Next question is for Leo, and it's from Zane Hill of the Los Angeles Business Journal. Can you discuss some of APM's efforts to develop and implement low and zero emission equipment at the San Pedro Bay Port Complex?
Thanks, Zane, for that question. I appreciate it. What we have announced recently is that we are investing in technology to make the last shift for our hybrid straddle carriers to go to fully battery electric. Right now, with the 132 straddle carriers we have, they are hybrids, so that is battery electric, but there is a small diesel engine running on biofuel to be able to power the battery. Right now, the technology is in a pilot stage. We will take on 2 new units, and 2 units we're going to retrofit so that we can go 100% battery electric. So it's a pilot. It's important because the outcome of this pilot will determine how fast we can completely change the entire fleet of our automated straddle carriers to battery electric and get ready for the 2030 important date in California.
Thank you, Leo. This next question is from Bill Mongaluzzo, Journal of Commerce. I understand, that Bill understands that some terminals in LA Long Beach are experiencing longer than usual rail container dwell time. Gene, what is your assessment of the rail container dwell times at the Port of LA?
Yeah, Bill, a couple things go into this, and I appreciate you raising it. As of Friday's operational report, we had about 12,500 rail containers here at the Port of Los Angeles. I'd like to see that number at around 9,000, given the overall volume of import and export activity that we have right now. 12,500 on the docks right now. 4,300 of which are 9 days or older. That number should be closer to zero. Now, as explained to me by both Western railroads, there have been a couple of extenuating circumstances, some outages on rails, some imports that came in that need to be moved off dock to ancillary yards that'll be pushed out across the transcontinental system. Safe to say, though, one of the great takeaways that we took from the surge during COVID is that we've put together this dashboard of vital statistics that we look at every single day. So as we start to see trending or micro trends, we can act on it, bring people together and talk about what needs to be addressed and what approaches need to be changed. By no means is this any kind of catastrophe at this point. It's just simply a watch out, working together between the marine terminal operators, liner shipping companies, and the Western railroads. We'll see this little bit of an uptick start to moderate and turn back down. But that's the beauty of these dashboards, where we have clear visibility to all aspects and these interdependencies so we can act quickly. I appreciate the question, Bill, and thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you, Gene. Following up, Leo, on your questions on ZE, we have a question now here from Donna Littlejohn at the Southern California News Group. She's saying APM Terminals in Los Angeles is one of a handful of automated terminals in the San Pedro Bay complex. There's been a lot of discussion here in this area about automation versus jobs. Is APM doing anything in this area to assist the workforce today and into the future?
I think it is clearly an important topic. First of all, we all need to recognize is that the PMA and the ILW have bargained in good faith the right to automate. APM Terminals have decided to automate their yard. The cranes are not automated, the rail yard is not automated. And what we desperately need, and we're working together with our partners in the ILW, is to upskill the workforce. The mechanics need to have new skills to be able to maintain the more advanced equipment, and that's what we have a plan for, and we invest in, and we are making sure that that is happening.
Very good. Gene, any follow-ups on this point?
Yeah, just a couple points here. Back to Bill's question. The rail dwell time right now at the Port of Los Angeles is 5.8 days. I'd like to see that dwell between 2 and 4. Again, complicated a little bit by having these extenuating circumstances that I mentioned, and the fact that we've got about 4,300 boxes on the terminals that are 9 days or older. The other piece also, back to Zane's question, please remember, as we updated the Clean Air Action Plan back in 2017 to introduce for the first time on paper, as the only port complex in the world, our desire to go to zero emission, we've learned a lot about these source categories. Been working on the international stage as well as here nationally and locally. And I named those 5 categories: vessels, trucks, locomotives, harbor craft, and cargo handling equipment. And in that order is their percentage of emissions. Cargo handling equipment is at the bottom of that. And while early days, we want to get this port complex to a zero emission environment, we're encouraging the manufacturers and their tiered suppliers, getting after the big pieces early on now, as we've got it zeroed in, is what this mission has to be. In order to reduce health risk, to promote quality of life and do our level best to get into areas that were previously not considered, that's where we've got to focus on. It's not going to slow us down or deter us from those other areas that we've already put our commitments to. But if we can get after these ships, as an example, in the green shipping corridors that we've designed with the C40 group of cities and companies like Maersk and APM Terminals, if we could reduce emissions on the Shanghai to Los Angeles Long Beach route by only 10%, that would be equivalent to all ship emissions at the Port of Los Angeles in 1 year. So this is where we got to go after. We can't paint the globe green with one stroke of the brush, but we sure can get big chunks out of this by working together as an industry. So I appreciate the ongoing comments. And again, to the last question around automation and jobs and cargo handling equipment, we simply cannot leave the workforce behind. Growing cargo is an important component of not only job preservation, but job growth now and in generations to come. As we've said before, for every 4 containers we bring through the Port of Los Angeles, we create 1 job. It's very powerful. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you. We have one question here left, and it is for Gene. It's from Jose Herrera at City News Service. Gene, last week you hosted EPA Administrator Michael Reagan on a tour of the port. The EPA is taking applications for a $3 billion Clean Ports program to help fund ZE infrastructure. How much grant money is the port seeking, and what would the money be spent on?
Oh, thanks, Jose. And this is a great question to end on after the other comments. It was wonderful to see Administrator Reagan back here in Los Angeles again, his second visit around the port, and to make sure that we continue to align on the administration's initiatives with those of the city. Led by Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, we spent the better part of 2.5 hours with the administrator. He also talked to environmental justice groups, met with elected officials. Congresswoman from the 44th District here in California, Nanette Barragan, spent a lot of time with us on that day as well. What's coming up now are $3 billion worth of grants through the EPA, funded partially by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was passed on a bipartisan basis, and the Inflation Reduction Act. These $3 billion are broken out into the Clean Ports Program and climate pollution reduction grants. Each applicant can ask for up to a ceiling of $500 million, and we're going for everything. We're going to be swinging for the fences. These grants in part will help on both the infrastructure side. Think of getting electricity and hydrogen power down to the port for our customers and stakeholders, and the equipment that we move cargo with, trucks, cargo handling equipment, cranes, etc. This administration has done more for the supply chain since President Biden took office and issued his executive order on supply chains than any in recent memory. So there's a lot more work to do. We're not resting on our own laurels, but here again, as the only port complex in the world that has its zero emission goals etched into their strategies, we're going to go after this with everything we've got. Thanks, Jose. Good hearing from you.
Very good. That concludes our time for media questions. Gene, back to you for final thoughts.
Thanks, Philip. And Leo, really appreciate you joining us today from Guatemala and providing insights on the key topics that all of our observers want to hear. Look forward to connecting with you soon.
Likewise, it was great to do it.
In conclusion, yesterday I joined the premiere of the Port Commission documentary, The Smell of Money, at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. This was the Doc Sunday program, which concluded the 21st annual LA Harbor International Film Festival, led by Stephanie Martisich. As many of you know, the fishing and canning industry was so powerful at the port during a good part of the 20th century. Tens of thousands of jobs were created, and think of companies like the Star-Kissed tuna brand. Immigrants came to San Pedro in the harbor area from Croatia, Italy, Japan, Greece, Portugal, the Philippines, and other countries. This business built families, homes, communities, and places of worship. To get a flavor of how much this meant to all of us, Don, would you please roll the trailer?
The whistle would blow, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night. When that whistle blew, everybody went to the canneries. And it wasn't just one cannery, because all the canneries were going to get fish.
On the bus, ooh, the canneries here, it stinks. Then my mother would turn around and say, the money doesn't stink.
When the wind would blow, we would have that smell. That, oh, okay, San Pedro's working.
And everyone knew what it meant. It meant that the canneries were working, people were working, making a living, providing for their families.
And so many of the people who worked in the industry were immigrants from Italy, from Croatia, from Portugal, from Greece, from the Philippines, and Japan. It was truly representative of what we call the melting pot.
People that came here with little means, they came here with nothing and they made it into something.
The smell of tuna was all over San Pedro. I mean, it was just, it was part of the neighborhood.
Oh, that's just fantastic. I want to thank the local filmmaker and director, Jack Barrich, for spotlighting this great industry. I also want to recognize two of our own here at the Port of Los Angeles, Lee Smith, the producer, and Augie Bezmalinovich, the associate producer. Equally, our appreciation goes out to the women and men who built this industry. And this is so appropriate during Women's History Month. The women who were the backbone of this canning industry were on display. And what an appropriate way to celebrate. The 30-minute film will be available to watch on the Port's YouTube channel and website starting this Thursday, March 21st. It will also begin airing on LA City View Television Channel 35 at 6 p.m. on Thursday as well. Thanks again for being here today. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you again in April.